We're all good to go now. So, welcome everyone who joins in today. Just want to welcome Marianne O'Connor, who's joined us. Thanks for joining us, Marianne.
You're welcome. Hello.
So, for those of you that don't know, Marianne is the writer of her previous novels are Gallipoli Street, Worth Fighting For, Wallflower, In a Great Southern Land, and Where Fortune Lies. So all of them have been written since 2015. So that's pretty amazing that you've written so many in that short time. Marianne has a combined arts education degree with specialties in environment, music, and literature. And after a successful marketing career, she now focuses on writing fiction and non-fiction as well as public speaking. Marianne lives in a house overlooking her beloved bushland in northern Sydney with her husband Anthony and their two sons Jimmy and Jack and their very spoilt dog Saxon. So her latest novel is Sisters of Freedom, and I've just finished reading it. Really, really loved it. And I was just saying to Marianne, some of it's set sort of in the Hawkesbury area, which is very close to where I live. So really liked reading about places I'd heard of and visited before and that, which was really, really great. And just for everyone watching in, if you ask a question during the Facebook Live, thanks to HarperCollins, they've got some copies of Sisters of Freedom to give away. So please type your questions to Marianne in comments. So thanks, Marianne, again.
Oh, you're most welcome.
Would you like to tell us a little bit more about Sisters of Freedom?
Well, it actually began before I was a writer, this story. My sister had a house in Rosemead Avenue in Hornsby, and I found out that this house was actually the original house where a suffragette mum and her daughters lived.
Oh,
and the dusty old professor father. So it's a real house, and it was a real family, and that was at the turn of the century. And I used to walk around that house. It was built in 1900, I think, and it's absolutely beautiful, beautifully preserved. And I'd just walk around it and I'd think about these feisty women of the time living there. And I thought to myself, that'd make a really good book one day. And that was about 15 years ago. And it took another, 9 years for me to become a writer. So it all began way before, writing books was still a twinkle in my eye, shall we say. So that's where it began.
Yeah. And the people that, like the sisters that it's written about, are they based on real people?
They're a little bit biographical because I'm one of three girls, three boys and three girls. My sisters, we have traits in those three characters for sure. I think I'm quite a bit like Ivy.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about Ivy is probably, it's not a great thing about myself, but when I was little, my father used to always say to go out of the room when something was bad on the news. And he'd say, it's not nice for little girls. And so I kind of grew up with a bit of an attitude of sticking my head in the sand when something wasn't pleasant in the news. And that, sorry, it's my dog. He's opening the door. He's very talented. I got into this terrible habit of sort of sticking my head in the sand when I didn't want to know. If something was ugly on the news, I didn't want to know. And so I made Ivy that person, because as you get older, you realise you need to know. You do need to know, and you need to have a social conscience, and you need to basically silence is condonement. And that really changed for me as I got older and I started realising the world needs you to take notice. You can't hide from it. You can't hide from reality. So that's Ivy, and she's got that from me. Aggie, the middle sister, is a lot like my sister Linda, that she nurtures everybody around her. She's beautiful, my sister.
Yeah.
And very, very beautiful mother. Now a grandmother of a new little baby. And
nice.
And my older sister's always wanted to take on the world, like Frankie, and very successfully actually. And she's an entrepreneur. She's a wonderful businesswoman. So yeah, she's done it.
Yeah. And I liked at the back of the book how you had like the timelines of important things in history that have happened for women. Some of them were surprising how late they were.
Yeah. That was a real shock doing that timeline, because I had this idea in the back of my head, I'll just put how long it took for a woman to be elected to Parliament, and because it's all about suffragettes and so on. But in the end, I ended up writing, what was it, 2 pages of it, because it took a long time, but the achievements were so varied and so amazing that I really wanted to, all the way up to, Kamala Harris becoming Vice President of the United States last year. But from the first women's trade unions being established in 1890, but there was a very big gap from when we got the vote until any real change was made for women.
Yeah.
And that really was probably a little bit in the 40s and 50s, but the big changes happened in the 70s. It took a long time. The first funded women's refuge in Australia wasn't until 1975.
Yeah. And even like the women's no-fault divorce and that as well. And
yeah, 70s,
pretty
and
amazing, really.
Well, look, I mean, even recently, gay marriage has only been legalised, what was it, 2 years ago or something? So we take a really long time as a society sometimes to come around. But it was a huge achievement for Australian women in 1902. New Zealand women got the vote first in the world, and then Australian women got it not long after, and then Australian women at the same time became the first place in the world where women could stand for government. And that was really, really big, because that didn't happen in the UK till 1918 and America till 1920. So it's really, really amazing. We were ahead of ourselves down here.
Yeah. And could you tell me a little bit about what sort of research you did for Sisters of Freedom?
A lot more than I thought I'd have to, because I thought I kind of knew the story, but I didn't know the story. And I think most Australians don't know the story. I'm not sure about New Zealanders, but certainly, for example, Vida Goldstein, she should be a national hero, and the story should be as famous and as beloved as the Anzac story, and it's respected, really, because these women went to war, and nothing against Anzac story. My grandfather was an Anzac, and I highly revere that. But he did the same thing, that they put us on the map from their sheer courage and for having a voice and for doing this incredible service for their country. These women really did. Vida Goldstein had many offers of marriage. She never married. She dedicated her whole life to the cause, and she travelled the whole world trying to help women get the vote. And it wasn't getting the vote to have the vote. It was getting the vote to change laws that are against women. And it's never been truer than now. And it's really amazed me the timing of this book coming out, because we need the inspiration of these women, because we need to change the plight of women, change that mindset against women it's still there. It doesn't matter how many laws change. The mindset hasn't changed for quite a section of society. So they've inspired me, and I was really shocked at how long it took for us to have the rights that we have.
Yeah. And what would you say was like the most surprising thing you found when you were doing your research?
The most surprising thing was how women became the property of men, legally the property of men. So we may as well have been an armchair, If a woman left a violent husband, he immediately got custody of the children. That really shocked me.
Yeah.
In some courts in America, they ruled on the rule of thumb. It wasn't supposed to be a law, but they ruled on it, that a man was allowed to hit his wife as long as he didn't use an implement wider than his thumb.
Well.
Yeah, that really shocked me to the core. It was legal to rape your wife, and you had to surrender all property, everything you owned when you married, and you couldn't. If you're a teacher, you had to cease practicing immediately when you were married. Any professional career, no, really only very sort of minor physical jobs were still allowed for a married woman. So we really just became an armchair. A sofa.
And we've got a few people watching and some questions coming through, which is great. Tony said that she can't wait to read your book, and she's wondering if Indigenous women were given the vote a lot later, and I think it mentions that in your book.
Yes, they weren't given the vote till 1962, so that's 60 years later, and Indigenous people weren't recognised as citizens in Australia until 1967. I was born in 1968. I can't believe when my mother was pregnant with me, Indigenous people weren't recognised as citizens of this country. It's appalling, absolutely appalling. But yes, I did put a little line in there. I wasn't really allowed to have the voice. I would have loved to. But at the moment, there's a very big push to support Indigenous people writing their own story, which I think is the right thing to do and very important. But I did put just a little line in there. You'll read it in the book that I did have a little dig about it, have my little say about it.
Yeah, that's pretty shocking, really. Patricia's wondering if you keep to a strict writing schedule.
Yes, I do. I get up every morning. It's going to sound really bad. I sort of stalk myself on Facebook and so on. I have a look around. Oh, who gave me a review last night? What happened overnight in the world of Marianne O'Connor? Which sounds really egotistical, but I'm just nervous. What have people said? And I always do that. And then with my cup of tea, and then once I've done with that rubbish, I sit down and I reread what I wrote the day before, and then I start fresh copy. Rereading the day before, depends on the day, anywhere between 2,000 and 4,000 words. And once I've read that, I will then write fresh copy, because you can't jump straight in. It's like a dream, when you're asleep and you're dreaming and you wake up momentarily and you want to go back into that dream. So you have to sort of fall back into that dream and keep the story going.
Yeah.
And that's why it happens like that you have to have that little bit of a get the momentum back to slide back into the dream.
And Patricia has a question you sort of answered a little bit before. She said, do you read your reviews? So do you read it? Do you read all your reviews, or?
I scour for them. There's something wrong with me. I have author friends that they're like, don't read the reviews, whatever you do. I read every review. And sometimes it's heartbreaking. Honestly, I would probably get, majority good reviews. People are pretty kind. But every now and then somebody will really hate it. And it's like somebody attacked my child. I get really, really hurt, really hurt. It's not that I don't agree with them. Sorry, it's my dog again. It's not that I don't agree with them. It's more that I just, I take it to heart too much. Yeah. I'm probably too sensitive to be right.
And Mary's wondering what you've done to promote your book this time.
Oh, you do an enormous amount. Radio, sometimes television, a lot of Facebook and social, and I write a lot of articles. I've been in, national papers and all that sort of thing. But what happened differently this time was really, really wonderful and special, and hasn't happened before. I was telling you before about the story being set in this house in Rosemead Avenue. And what ended up happening, it's the woman that bought my sister's house, where the story came from. She and I got in touch because the book is printing, and I thought I better ring her and ask her if it's okay that I used her house in my story. So belatedly rang her. Fortunately, she was a really, really nice person, Joanne Moffat, and we chatted so long, and she loves the history of the house. So she was very excited that I'd set the story and based it, inspired by these women who lived there. And she said, would you like to have the book launch here?
Oh.
Which I couldn't believe. She's on the board for the local Hornsby Ku-ring-gai Women's Shelter.
Oh,
so these are victims of domestic violence and terrible things. We ended up having the book launch there. We raised a lot of money, and it's all gone to the shelter. We're still raising money through the book. So I've never been associated with a charity before, to my shame, really. I always will now. But it was the most incredibly gratifying thing. And yes, it did get quite a bit of publicity, but it was much more about the fact that every single book that sold was going to help a woman in crisis.
Yeah.
And the theme of the book is about helping women in crisis. So I couldn't believe that.
Yeah, and it was great to be able to do it then in the house that it was set as well.
It was absolutely beautiful. Have a look at, I think I put it, I'm not sure if I put it on the website yet. It's on my Facebook page. You can see the photos. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, that does sound really amazing. Mary's wondering if you have writer peers who you give support to and they support you.
Yes, we do. We have a few groups, and it's really valuable. It's really, really valuable. Like, you might have just a question about sort of maybe public lending rights, or it might be a very technical writing question. But mostly we really promote each other. So if someone's book's coming out, we all promote each other. If we see each other's, we call them shelfies, when you see each other's book for the first time in a store. That's an
Mm.
exciting day. That's usually the week you come out, you run around taking selfies of each other's books and posting them everywhere. But mostly it's there'll be inboxing as well, where it's just like, have you had this happen to you? Do you think that this is a plausible twist in the tale? All sorts of support, but certainly it's a really wonderful community, the Australian, especially historical fiction. We're all really good friends, and but also contemporary. I've got some gorgeous friends, Australian authors, like, I'll name drop, I suppose, Rachel Johnson, Tricia Stringer, and Darry Fraser, and people like that. And they're just really, really special. But Annie Seaton, they really look after anybody new too. So if you come along and you're fortunate enough to get contracted with HarperCollins or whoever, they'll take you right under their wing.
Yeah,
and they
that's
really,
right.
they're beautiful.
And do you like someone reading as you're writing, or do you wait till you've written the whole novel?
Somebody reading the work I'm writing?
Yeah.
Yes, my sisters.
Okay, yeah.
And my best friend. They're the only ones. And I actually have a man now who he will read as well. So I've got a male reader, which is great because, it is more of a female genre. Mind you, I do have male readers, but my sister Linda's probably the number one, and she's really supportive. A lot of my stories have a lot of family history, so she also helps me make sure that I don't forget great little tidbits and put them in there.
Yeah, that's good that you've got that support. And do you want to tell us more about your other books? We've mostly been talking about Sisters of Freedom.
Yeah, I was just thinking, it's out of the shot. There they are. They're up there in the corner. Yeah. So the first one, I don't know if you can see them anyway. Gallipoli Street was about my grandfather, who was an Anzac, as I was mentioning before, James Clancy. That's actually what got me into writing was him. He it was just always in the back of my mind that I wanted to tell his story, and so it's very much fiction, but it was inspired by he and my grandmother. He went to Gallipoli at 17 and he got injured 3 times. He rejoined. He lost some really special people, and then he went through the Great Depression. And, of course, there was no money, which is the book I'm writing at the moment, actually. I'm writing a lot about that. And then his sons went to war. So it was just an incredible thing that he had to go through. So I always wanted to write it. It took 3 years to get published, and I went to every publisher in Australia, but I just didn't believe that it wouldn't get published.
Yeah. And had you been able to talk to him a lot about that before?
Well, no, actually, he died before I was born. It's a funny thing, but his birthday was just a few days different to mine. This sounds really silly. I just always felt very connected to him. I always felt like he was around. I know that's a bit woo-woo. I really wanted to write that book for him in his memory because it wasn't easy for him. He had post-traumatic stress, you'd say now. They called it shell shock then. And he went through a very hard time. And he gave a very big chunk of his life emotionally. His mental health suffered from it. So, but he was a very good man and a good father. He had 7 children and 26 grandchildren, I think. I'm the youngest granddaughter. So, yeah. So that's the first one. The second one was Second World War. So I did First World War, Second World War. And the Second World War one is about my aunts and uncles during the Second World War, including my parents.
Okay.
Because I grew up on those tales. Very close family. And then the third one was about Vietnam. That was really emotional to write about Vietnam. I was very surprised. I cried and cried and cried writing that book. It was really hard to write that one. But it's got all the 60s music and culture. That was the fun part. I used to play the music and dance around the house when I was writing that. I love the Doors and I love all that music. And then I wrote, I decided to go back in time. So I went back to the Gold Rush, which is a great southern land. And then I wrote Where Fortune Lies. And that's just a bushranger rollicking adventure fun. I mean, I really enjoyed writing that book. But this one came back to something very close to my heart again, to write about suffragettes. And that was really, really difficult because it was, once again, it took longer because there was a lot more to say, and it was really emotional. It was very emotional.
And before we were talking about you're promoting this book at the moment, and you've got a couple editing and you're writing some. How do you manage remembering everything and keeping track of where you're up to?
What's the main character's name again? At the moment, I've got 2 in editing, 1 I'm writing, and 1 I've just released. So it's like 500,000 words. And so
Mm.
it's, what is it? So I don't know how many pages, but it's just a really massive amount of
Mm.
words in your head. And sometimes even just before this, I was like, no, don't get the names of them wrong, because there's so many characters in each
Yeah.
book. And I write these really, really big stories with big families, like epics. And so there's a lot of names. I run out of names too. Sometimes I'll meet someone, I'll think, oh, that's a really good name, and I'll text it to myself. I'll use that one somewhere, Yeah.
And can you tell us anything about the books that you've got waiting to be edited, or the one you're writing at the moment?
The one I'm writing at the moment is the Great Depression, and
Yeah.
it's very much about my family, because I didn't really talk about the poverty in any of the other books, but they were extremely poor, and they lived off rabbit and gold dust from the creek and all that sort of stuff. And my grandfather worked on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, so
Wow. Yeah.
it's a bit sort of like a Ruth Park inspired novel, and it's very much about going through extreme hardship but having hope and a beautiful warm centre of your family that is your true wealth. It's really moving writing this, because my grandmother used to say, my nana, and not in an unkind way, she would say, you don't really know how lucky you are living in these modern times. And she used to have to hand wring and hand wash all the washing for a family of 9. She had to make her own bread in a dugout anthill. They did live on wild rabbit, like they just had nothing. So I've really taken a lot of inspiration. She was a beautiful person, really giving, kind person. So I've tried to pull through all those stories, and with a big love story with the oldest daughter, a forbidden one, and to sort of show how it was for them back then, but how beautiful that rich centre of the family still is in my family. So I'm writing that. And the other one is a little bit out there. I've written a modern novel. So it's actually a story set in Manly now. And it's sort of a big chill. They're coming together after 20 years for a reunion. And it's very biographical. So it's all about just the fun times they had, the great times they had, but then somebody died, and it's 20 years later, and you're finding out why. So that's in America at the moment. It's kind of going to be pitched to the American audience, so I don't know, because apparently they really love Manly, which doesn't surprise me. So we'll see.
They both sound like some really good ones, and quite a bit different from each other.
Yeah, well, the other one I'm working on right now is set back in the Second World War, so you think it's familiar territory, but it's not, because I'm going to Crete, so it's going to be a spy love story.
Yeah. So have you been to Crete before?
Yes. And when I pitched it to the publisher, I had this wonderful idea that I was going to get to go there to write. But COVID had other ideas.
At least you've been, so you can draw some of that memory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Patricia's wondering if you have any advice for any budding historical fiction writers.
Yes. The first piece of advice I would give about writing historical fiction is the history can underpin the plot for you so easily. That was what I found hard about writing a contemporary novel, is I didn't have that. So basically history is like this wonderful underpinning, skeleton of your story. So if you're wondering where to go next, you just say, well, what happened at this time in history? Like what happened in March 1901, April 1901? And you can find lots of, what you'll find while you're doing that, it's not only the facts, but the people involved. And then you can start reading their stories, and they will really influence some aspects of your characters. So history helps you tell the story. It really helps you tell the story. The other thing I'd say is they don't want the same old thing, the publishers. They want something a bit different. However, they do want the same old thing, because they want a hero's story. They do love a romance in there. Not that you have to stick to that, but it's really popular. And they need it to be accurate. So you'll have to really, really make sure that you get that right. But once you've written it, this was actually a post the other day from all the authors. It was a new person there, and she said, I've written an historical novel. I just finished it, my first one. What do I do now? And it was a really good question, and we all had a lot to say about it. Quite a few people said, leave it. just leave it and don't do anything for a month. Just go away from it. And then other people were saying, get all your friends to read it. Get some alpha readers. I would recommend that, actually. And then other people were saying, get a professional edit. I would also very much recommend that, because a professional edit, it might cost you, I remember paying $700-800 for that, which is a lot of money. However, they know what the publishers want.
Yeah.
So that's really worthwhile. That's a really good idea. But get people to read it. If you feel you've come as far as you can, get people to read it, and then rewrite it, and then pitch it. Ellen and Unwin, I think, still have a Friday pitch, and they want the first chapter. So pretty sure they still do that. I did that. They didn't pick me up, but I did that.
And I know you said a little bit about how it took, was it 3 years to get your first novel published? What kept you going all that time?
Sheer stubbornness, Jackie. That is actually true. It actually horrifies me to think how many wonderful novels are out there that will never be read because the person didn't have
the determination or the
conviction, the blind conviction and stubbornness that I had. But also just that maybe they're a bit shy and unsure of themselves, and they don't push it, and they lose confidence. They get a knockback and they think, oh, okay, that's such a shame. Don't give up. Rewrite it, get an edit, get more readers. If you really want it, though, you do have to be very, very persevering. And I remember there were times that I would get rejected and I'd put my forehead on the table on this desk and I would cry. I would cry, I'd be heartbroken, because I so believed it was what I was meant to do with my life, and I couldn't understand what I was doing wrong. But then I'd get a phone call from my gorgeous sister and pull myself back together and open up the document and start again. Just keep... It's something you have to perfect, and that first novel's the hardest one. So that's your baby, that's your first child, and it's really, really hard to get that first novel right.
And over those 3 years, did you have to? Did it change a lot?
Yes. Well, yes and no. I remember when I was pitching Gallipoli Street, the stats were 10,000 new fiction writers pitch a year. That's what publishers get a year, 10,000 manuscripts, and they only pick a handful, like 4 or 5. That was a pretty discouraging statistic. But it's probably true, but I think probably a pretty large percentage of those aren't very serious attempts. But it was, it's really, really a hard journey to get published. And that's why it took me so long. It took me to my 40s to try, because I just thought, it's too hard. But once you've written the book and you're really convinced it should be published, whether you're right or not, your stubbornness can take over, and you're like, no, I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up. I remember my brother said to me, I got a nice rejection, and he said, frame it, put it on the wall, and stop. You're just torturing yourself. This is after 3 years. It's not going to happen. And I said, I will never, ever give up, ever. And he's like, well, your funeral. He was only trying to help me, but I didn't give up.
Yeah. And had you always thought you would be a writer?
It's a funny thing. Somebody put on Facebook the other day, one of those, what did you think you wanted to do when you were grown, when you grew up? And I always wanted to be a writer. So
you did, yeah.
It's funny, yeah. I mean, it was either that or be the new ABBA. I want to be a dancing queen. I did actually write an album of music in my late teens, early 20s, and it's never going to be heard publicly, I'm telling you right now.
Could you tell us what you like reading yourself, and maybe if there's anything you've been reading lately you could recommend to us?
Well, the real tragedy for me since I've become an author is I read less, because I'm always writing.
Yeah.
And I also start becoming a bit of a parrot. I start writing like them. So that's difficult. But when I get time, I love to read. I used to read prior to being a writer. I really love Leanne Moriarty, I have to say. I think she's really gifted. I think Rachel Johnson's really a wonderful Australian author as well. Read a lot of Australian. Marion Keyes, love her. The Irish, funny woman. I never read a novel of hers I didn't absolutely love. I love the classics. Sometimes I'll just go back and immerse myself back into an Austen. But yeah, I like lots of books. I love Jasper Jones, like Craig Silvey. That was absolutely one of the most beautiful novels.
Yeah.
Really loved it.
Did
Beautifully
you
written.
read his new? Have you read his new one, Honeybee?
Pardon?
Did you read Honeybee, his new one?
Not yet,
No,
because that's been right in the middle of all this. But I will.
That's good as well.
Yeah, I love his style. I have a really, really wide taste in books, I think. I don't like really dark books. It doesn't suit my personality.
Julie's got an interesting question. She's wondering if there's a lot of publishers in Australia.
Yes, but there's only a handful of big ones.
Yeah, there's a lot of small ones, aren't there?
Yeah, so when I say I went to get a publisher in Australia, I mean, I was trolling to find them. But, you know, you really want your big publisher if you can get it. But that's not to say that the smaller publishers can't take you places. So, but yes, it's pretty easy to find, really, but to start digging deeper, it's not quite so easy. What's hard for Australian authors is to get overseas.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we can do well in Australia and New Zealand, but it's difficult to break. It's really difficult to break into UK. For some reason, a few of my friends have really broken into Germany, which is for some reason they have.
Yeah.
Great. Germans read a lot. But my agent has said to me, if you can crack the US, the UK and Europe are much more open. So it's sort of apparently easy to go that way. But I mean, you know, there's no written rule on that. Yeah.
And have you always been with HarperCollins?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's good then, yeah.
I love them. Yeah. They're wonderful publishers.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. And
I'm not paid to say that. No, I do. I love them.
And just reminding people again that HarperCollins have given some copies of Sisters of Freedom to give away. So if you do have a question, please type it in comments and you'll have a chance to win a copy. Just want to talk about the cover. The cover's really beautiful. I love the woman on the cover.
Yes, it's a funny thing with covers because you always... I never know what to expect. I kind of thought it would be three sisters, you know, because it's about the three sisters. But I think it's much more powerful to have that single image. I would pick that book up. I think they did a beautiful job. I don't really have any say in it.
Who would you think that picture is of?
Oh, Ivy.
Yeah.
Because of the fabulous hat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, she loves her hats.
Yeah.
I think Frankie would have some hairpin falling out and some hair falling and the hat lopsided or something. And Aggie would be wearing grey. Yeah. So Ivy's the flamboyant youngest sister, artistic sister. I really love that cover, and I feel like I've had a lot of people say that too. And I think people just look at it and think, oh, I want to know about her. Yeah. So thank you, cover fairies, wherever you are.
And have you been published with different covers for this book? Or has it just been the same one?
Well, it's only just come out, so...
Yeah, and it's just available in Australia and New Zealand at the moment?
That's right. Yeah. So we are pitching it overseas, but like I said, it is hard to get published overseas, but you know, it's a matter of time too sometimes, I think.
Yeah. Could you tell me what you think for yourself makes a good story?
Emotion.
Yeah.
I really like to feel a gamut of emotions. So I want to feel maybe a bit worried and then relieved. I really, really want to run with it. So, you know, what's going to happen. That's sort of a bit of a turmoil. And then, you know, sublime, perfect moment. I love that. I'm so happy, you know. And then heartbreak. No, you can't do that to me. And then at the end, oh, please, you know, I want to run that gamut all the way through. I want to sit up to 2 o'clock in the morning to finish it. That's what I want from a book.
Drawing you through all the emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And can you tell us, how can people keep in touch with you?
Big part of people.
Keep in touch with you. What social media do you have?
Oh, I'm pretty prolific on Facebook. Just ask any of my friends. I'm hopeless at Twitter. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a twit at Twitter. I don't really bad. But I'm right in there with Facebook. Apparently, that's my demographic, my age. Middle-aged woman sitting on Facebook. I love Facebook. You can contact me in any professional sense. People can contact me through my website. I do get fan mail through my website, which I really love.
Yeah,
I love fan mail. Who doesn't? So that's really nice. So, but you can inbox me. Just follow Marianne O'Connor on Facebook, and you can just inbox me. I'm really good at getting back to people because I get so excited that you bothered contacting me.
No, that's great to hear. And have you found, out of your books, anyone that's been a lot harder to research?
They all have their tricky bits. A war is always hard because you can't get anything wrong. In actual fact, when Gallipoli Street was going to print, just about to go to print, I realised that I had the wrong, he wasn't a general, brigadier or something, I can't remember what he was. But anyway, the leader, it was a general. I had the wrong general. Leading this light horse attack, and it was actually the last charge of the light horse, like Bathsheba, like a really famous battle. And I had the wrong generals. That wasn't very good. And it was Cheval, which I knew. And then I had the wrong brigade as well. So I fixed Cheval. I saw that pretty quickly because he's really famous. And I was like, oh, that's not right. He was an Aussie. What's this? So I fixed that. But then I had the wrong brigade. And you cannot get something like that wrong. I would have been in so much trouble if had that gone to print. And it even got through my editors. So.
Oh, really? Wow.
But they never saw the Cheval mistake. That was a bit earlier, kind of thing. But the brigade mistake, that nearly went to print. And there was a mistake in Wallflower that I had the wrong name. Right in the middle of this little tender love bit, that the wrong guy took her hand. It was it was his brother as well, so it was really bad. And then somebody picked it up and got cranky with me, some fan. You've got the wrong name. So anyway, that's been changed in reprints.
Oh, it was. Okay.
But the most research is always the wars. Like Vietnam was really hard because I knew nothing about it. I really didn't. And I had to really get everything right. The 3 war novels, they were the hardest to get right. The suffragette movement wasn't so much hard as it was. I was shocked at lack of women's rights. Yeah. Shocked me. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Everyone, make sure you go out and look for Sisters of Freedom. Really, really great read. And thanks for everyone who joined in and the questions that people asked.
Thank you, everyone. I really love doing this, and thank you for your questions. And I hope whoever wins the books really enjoys them.
Thank you, and bye, everybody.
See ya.